Transformers Rise of the Beast is an interesting movie because it kind of exists in this landscape of being not only a sequel to Bumblebee, which takes place in the 80s, but also a prequel, maybe, to the Michael Bay films. I just got out of seeing it last night, so I went and saw it, and I gotta say that I did like it, Stephen Cable Jr. is the director here. It's during the 90s now, and a new faction of Transformers, the Maximals, join the Autobots as allies in the battle for Earth. Everything that you see in the trailer is pretty much what you get here. It's a very thin script in terms of building the human characters up. You have Anthony Ramos playing Noah and Dominique Fishback playing Elena. And Dominique Fishback, I kind of mentioned it in my rapid review that we did out of the theater last night, but she did incredible work in Amazon Prime's Swarm. And I was really excited to see her bring a new levity and maybe a new kind of style to a character in a blockbuster movie like Transformers. And the script isn't quite up to par with where they're trying to position these characters, and that leaves I would actually go and venture to say a lot to be desired in terms of building a narrative connection between the viewer, the audience, and the characters that we're seeing on screen. Obviously, the Transformers and all of the infighting and the badassery that comes from teaming up with the Maximals and the Autobots and the humans is sweet, and I do like where they went in terms of the action set pieces here, and I think a large part of that is probably just due to it not being a Michael Bay film. The cinematographer here was Enrique Chediak. Chediak does a fantastic job at making sure that we're able to visually pick apart all the blocking in the film, where things are taking place. We get expansive moments where we're seeing the actual transformation of the Transformers, even amidst all of the action chaos that's going on around them. And so if you're going to this movie as a fan of the comics just to see the Transformers be Transformers, I think that this movie works really well. If you're going for the human characters and to see how they blend the worlds together, I think it's pretty much, on par for what we've gotten from this franchise thus far. For me personally, I wouldn't mind seeing another Transformers movie after watching this, just because of how much I did end up enjoying it for a Transformers film. If we're going and we're pushing more into Noah's backstory in later sequels and Elena's backstory, I don't know how well that's going to work. I think it only works if the plot is still centered around the Autobots and the wars that are occurring, and we use that as a landscape to propel the characters into a new story direction, is really the only way that this works. Humans driving the plot forward is nice in concept when you're talking about a film for humans, right? But that's not why we go to these movies. We go to these movies to see the Transformers. And so if you use the Transformers to, interweave a story between humanity and this alien race, I think it can be very effective in terms of uncovering new plot points and new story beats of the human characters in the film. I just don't think that they've been able to quite capture that relationship between the humans and the Transformers as well as, other franchises dealing with other things, to be honest, But I think nonetheless, Cable Jr. does a really good job directing. Like I said, Chediak, fantastic cinematography here. The overall voice acting from all of the Transformers is quite surprisingly good. I don't know if you should be surprised by it necessarily, but I think after so long of watching these movies, I've just come to expect the same old, same old. And one of the things that I had mentioned in my out of theater reaction was that Pete Davidson does an actually really incredible job with his performance as Mirage. It's perhaps his best acting work that he's done in quite some time, on screen. I haven't seen the latest Hulu movie that Pete Davidson was in, But nonetheless, I think it's a nice kind of deviation from the Bumblebee story that we've been getting a lot in this franchise. So it was a nice deviation for that regard. Also, you have Michelle Yeoh in here, and who doesn't love Michelle Yeoh? Michelle Yeoh is having a whole resurgence, obviously, with her recent Academy Award win. And then, just the projects that she's selecting. Her and her agent are really diving into diversifying her portfolio, even though it was already super diverse. But I think Everything Everywhere All at Once has kind of put her on the map to be, a standout, true A-list actor now. And so every time that she's in a project, I get excited. I fanboy a little bit over it. To wrap up my overall thoughts on this movie, if you are a Transformers fan and this is kind of your franchise and your property that is near and dear to your heart from your childhood, I'd say go watch it. If you've been kind of lukewarm on the Transformers film, aren't much of a comic fan, you aren't going to understand a lot of the references that are being made in the movie, the little Easter eggs that we get here and there. I think there's an end credits scene. I don't think it's quite all the way at the end of the film. I think it's a mid-end credits scene. And that kind of does something interesting, and it takes it in kind of a new direction for the franchise, which it's good to always be propelling the story forward in your franchise. But I must say that especially with the other franchise that they're toying with here, that hasn't turned out too well filmically for that property. So if we are getting some type of a crossover event like between those two franchises, it's a little strange, not gonna lie. I don't, they were talking about a long time ago. They were talking about a 21 Jump Street and a Men in Black crossover. That is a crossover that I would pay money to go see. What they're doing here, I'm not quite sure it works. But again, I think if you even, like the Michael Bay films, you liked Bumblebee, a lot of people did like Bumblebee. I think that this is kind of in line of Bumblebee and kind of rectifying a lot of the tragedy of the later Michael Bay films, after Linkin Park was out of the picture on their soundtrack. It turned sour there at the end for the Michael Bay films. They do make a reference to Mark Wahlberg in this movie, which again it's astonishing to me because they're touting this as a sequel of sorts. It's a prequel, but everything chronologically that has happened in this universe is still canon. And so if you're making a joke about Mark Wahlberg and then you know what I mean? Like, it's a little strange. But nonetheless, you're a fan, you like the other Transformers movies, go see it. If you've been lukewarm on it, I would say sit this one out. I mean, it's pretty bare bones basic in terms of what we would get in an action blockbuster these days. So I don't think you need to rush to the theater to see it unless you are a true fan.